some questions for me? I think the subject today that you wanted to hear about was saving, how people save money or try to save money. I think that idea starts at a very early age. I don't know how natural it is for each person. I can't imagine it's when a kid is born. Some kids are born to save and some kids are born to spend. I don't think so. Just like I'm not so sure that some kids are born to be a criminal and some are born to be a Rhodes Scholar. A lot has to do with environment. So the concept of saving, it's funny, I think my late mom really was more of a saver than my late dad. In fact, my dad spent everything that he did earn or gave it to charity. The minimum that he did earn, he used to give a fair amount to charity. And whereas my mother was different, though she took care of the household, my dad used to buy a lot of things for the household too. And my mom, I used to see, she often returned the stuff that my late dad used to buy. He used to buy en gros a lot of extra groceries that were not needed because he would buy a case, like a case of Campbell's soup or a case of some type of sugar. Whereas my mom only needed one, so she would return the rest of the case and say, we don't need this, I don't know why my husband, and she would take the money from that and save it, not spend it. Anyhow, from my point of view, I remember I used to get an allowance. I don't remember if it was $1 a week or $2 a week when I got a bit older. I used to go to the bank, walk to the bank, and the bank teller used to write in a pen or pencil in a bank book. And you'd see it grow and the pages would turn and you would have like an extra $100 at the end of a month, or not a month, the end of a year, if you're lucky. But ever since I would say, my last year or two of high school, I was a decent swimmer, so I used to work at a pool. Used to get paid, I think, at $1 or $2 per hour. I used to save that money. My parents did have a rule that any monies that I did earn, I could keep. Unlike some other parents who actually charge their kids, especially if the parents were poor, rent. So I used to put it away in the bank, and I used to enjoy watching the money grow in the bank, probably as much as some people watch. If they buy some nice pair of hockey skates, they get the same pleasure as I would of putting it in the bank. Different type of pleasure, but it's understandable for both. Then I worked steadily since the end of high school, the very first summer after high school. Myself and two other boys, we went down to Atlantic City and we worked there. By then I was a formal lifeguard, so I was a lifeguard, but that was only 5-6 hours a day. So at night I was a busboy waiter in the hotels in Atlantic City. All three of us went by bus. It was the cheapest way to get to Atlantic City. From Montreal to the Port Authority in New York, and then from the Port Authority to Atlantic City. We paid about $2.50 per night to sleep in some sort of rooming house in a pretty bad area of Atlantic City, near our place of work. And we used to clear a fair amount of money per week. We were making at least $100 every week. That's a lot in those days, many years ago. And the objective there was, and it was pretty much the same for all three of us, we wanted to come home with as much money as possible. We weren't sure we couldn't put it in a bank because there were no bank accounts for us to put it in over there, as there are today. Um, so we came home with the money, and then we would put it in the bank. I would put mine in the bank. Every other summer, even the summers when I was in college, I would always, I'd like to travel, but I always traveled to where there's a job. So one summer, the travel was to Jasper Park Lodge, Alberta, where I had a great job as a lifeguard. I was lucky to get it, but the pool was closed half the time because it was cold in Alberta. So rather than sit around an empty pool, for which we were paid, I volunteered to work as a busboy and then as a waiter, because it was all students. 600 students, 300 boys and 300 girls that worked in Jasper, Alberta. It was a lot of fun. And I remember they had a bank there. And everybody, not just me, we used to put away our tips. Anyways, I worked with two other lifeguards there, both of whom were from Montreal. And we set up to augment our income, and with the permission of the hotel, we had to split the profits. We set up a little fountain where people can get soft drinks and chocolate bars and stuff like that we paid for, and that we sold them at a profit. We used to buy chocolate bars for about 10 cents, and we sold them for about 30 or 50 cents. I forget the amount. Actually, that's where I met the Prime Minister, the future Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And so that summer, I stayed there for 4 months. I came home with $2,000. That was a huge, huge amount. Kids didn't make that in the summertime. I forgot to say before that I worked at Expo 67. That was I drove the La Balade tractor trailer train, taking around all the tourists around Expo 67, the US Geodesic Dome. We were paid $2.75. I remember per hour, and I do remember at the end of each summer, I would go to my parents saying, look, this is what I earned this summer. I'm going to pay for my school. My late father, and certainly my mother as well, said, no, that's your money, you keep it. We'll pay for your schooling. You have your own savings. If you choose to save it, which you appear to be, keep saving and it'll grow for you. So they really helped out in that regard, because most of my friends, I remember the time, who were going to McGill at that time, they had to pay for their own education, which was only about $650 per year, college tuition in those days. Thousands today, of course. And they had to contribute towards that. I was living at home. Basically, I never paid any home expenses. Indeed, I pretty much never moved out till I got married, even though I became a lawyer at a young age. I think I was 22 or 23. At that time, I was still living at home. Most of my friends had moved out by then, if they were lawyers. But especially my father, he was conservative. He said, you really shouldn't move out.
How did you invest your money while you were working those years? Did you put in what kind of account?
Basically,
did you buy a stock? Did you buy a bond?
No, it's not like today, where a lot of the young kids, they would invest in Bitcoin and other risky stuff which pays off or doesn't pay off, or high-tech stocks. Generally, I would have bought something that was known as, and they still have it today, term deposits. So you couldn't touch your money. So I would take $500 or $1,000 and I put it away for 5 years, and I couldn't touch it. You couldn't break it. And you get interest every year deposited into the account. I never bought stocks till I was, I think, certainly in my 30s. I wasn't a big believer in that, and probably I didn't understand it. It's not understood. It wasn't understood then as it is now. They didn't really have courses and stuff like that, and it wasn't, so big a thing. If I had done that, I probably would have done better, but we shouldn't forget that in 1981, when I bought a house for my family, which was relatively cheap in terms of what we see today, was $160,000. Interest rates were 21%. So if you put away the $160,000 that it cost to buy the house, at 21% per year interest, now you get 3 or 4% interest per year. You know, maybe a little more depending on the year. So it really wasn't the smartest thing, even though everybody was told, buy a house, it's going to be your best investment. Not necessarily. It may be your most useful investment if the price appreciates, but people don't really know what it cost them, especially young people, when they buy a house and then have a high mortgage and they got to pay out every month. Incidentally, when I bought the house, I was already around 29 years old. I was married for a few years. We had paid rent. I had $140,000 saved up, to which I put entirely on the house. So there was a $20,000 mortgage, and I was paying 21%. When my late dad found out that I was dumb enough, those were his words, to spend 21% borrowing money to buy a house. He was nice enough, and he wasn't really wealthy, certainly not then. He gave us $20,000 and said, don't ever borrow in order to pay for something, and certainly don't borrow at 21% per year interest. Today, everybody borrows. Everybody rents cars. They'll buy a car for $50,000, $100,000. They'll pay $1,000 every month or more to rent the cars. It's a different psychology. Maybe it's the right thing to do. And they have other money that they can take the capital and invest on the stock market or whatever. But I don't think people think of saving in the same way. My impression is that people with the extra money they earn and set some money aside, they as a couple probably decide, well, we have some money that we saved up this year. Let's take the $3,000 or $5,000 that we saved up and go on a trip. There's nothing wrong with that, but that certainly erodes any savings or savings potential that one can have. Because if you put away the $5,000 that you put on a trip 30 years ago, you may have $100,000 today from not spending those $5,000 on a trip. But what's different is, for example, it's people's level of taste too. People believe or feel it's more enjoyable to go far away on a trip than to go closer here in Canada. For example, in Canada, where we live, where I was born and raised, it probably is the most beautiful place in the world to travel for many people. Indeed, many Europeans, where Canadians go, come here to go travel into Alberta or in the mountains of British Columbia and Alberta, or northern Quebec, or northern Ontario, and the beautiful rivers and lakes that we have here. But for young couples or anybody traveling here, where did you go on your holiday? Oh, I went to Italy. I went to Spain. If you said, I went up to the Laurentian Mountains, where Europeans come here to go skiing, but if we go there, we're seen to be as somebody who didn't travel properly. So the mindset today is the more you spend, the happy you are. That's the feeling of many people. They don't spend that much money on travel in order to be unhappy, so that does make them happy. Just the idea of traveling. You know how they all say, see the world. Everybody wants to see the world without even looking into their own backyard. I would venture to say that there's many people in Montreal that have never been to northern Quebec, just a few hours away from Montreal, but have been to Italy or Spain or Portugal many, many times, or the Riviera. or countries in the Middle East or the Eastern Iron Curtain, other countries. Now, of course, the topic today is savings, but you can't think of a better way to save by at least, call it what you want, if you're restricting your length of travel. The further away you travel, the more expensive it is because it costs more to get there, apart from the cost of these hotels at many places, for example, in Europe.
Didn't you work in Paris?
Yes, I worked for 4 months in Paris, and that's a great example.
How old were you?
I was exactly 18 years old, and it was
After high school.
Yeah, just after. It was the second year. The first year was Atlantic City, then in Paris. I always tried to work away on the in the summers, and my parents thought it was a good idea too. I really went to Paris to improve my French because I knew then I wanted to become a lawyer in the province of Quebec. So I worked in a bank, beautiful bank, La Société Générale. It was like a museum.
How much money did they pay you?
$30 a week, which was the exact cost of what it cost me to live. Because
A month.
Per day. So I got paid $30 a week.
Your rent was?
And my rent was $2 per night. $2 per night, including the breakfast. Because in Paris, it was an exchange program. You find someone a job here and they find you a job there. And I didn't know anything about banking at all, except that you put money in a bank to save it. So I was in the traveler's check, le portefeuille étranger, the international exchange program. So, but 4 months in Paris cost me zero, since the $30 was really the cost of living in Paris. And I lived in a pension. You had your own room, but there were common showers. It was in the 9e arrondissement, the 9th sector. Beautiful, right near Galerie Lafayette and the museum. It was quite beautiful. I must say, on the weekends or when we had time off, I used to walk around Paris. Indeed, almost every weekend I went to a different place. You'd go on a train there. The trains are virtually nothing. You can go on a train to southern France or to Spain. I went to Yugoslavia just on weekends. And
Did you save any money that summer?
No. All the money went towards living the $30 that it cost, and we were paid very little. I came home with a few $100s, but that's an example of kids going away and spending $1,000, $2,000, or $3,000 in those days, not earning anything. So I would always combine travel, like Jasper Park Lodge was traveling to Alberta, and days off we'd go all over Alberta, Western Canada, but we were earning money every day. So we combined, the same thing as Atlantic City, always combined travel. Even Expo, working at Expo 67, I was young, we were paid $2.75 an hour. All of that went into the bank.
So by the time you were 25, how much money did you earn yourself? Not how much anybody gave you by working and by investing.
I would say the earnings between the ages of, let's say, after high school. Because before high school, I had odd jobs, including, lifeguarding and stuff like that, babysitting. So I was putting away money all the time, but not tons of money. But post high school, all the way up to
the time you got married.
Yeah, the time I got married, remember, I was living at home and earning a lawyer's salary and living at home. And I wasn't obliged to pay any home expenses.
And you didn't have a car.
I think the first car I owned I would have been around maybe 25 years old. Or it may have been a second car that I shared with my late mom. I don't even remember. It was a small Woody. It was $6,800.
So that was your first car.
That was my very first car, a very small car. And so to answer your question,
No, before you became a lawyer, how much money did you earn
before I became
yourself by doing these part-time summer jobs and these?
well, I would say anywhere from $8,000 to $15,000.
That's how much you saved?
The saving, yeah. Yeah, before then, because you couldn't, the summer I worked at Expo, I think I made, like Jasper, I came home with $2,000. And the kids talked to each other. How much did you make these 4 months that you worked in Jasper? Remember, there's 600 kids, we talked to each other. Most of the kids came home with $100 or $200 because they used to go drinking every single night. I didn't drink. I'd have a Coke or something, or a bag of chips. But they used to take their entire salary and drink, have fun and parties. I really wasn't oriented that way. I had fun with all the guys. We went around. We also, remember, we took cars from Jasper, Alberta to Vancouver. We were paid to drive cars. It's called deadhead, a car. People would rent a car in Vancouver, come to Jasper, and then we would have to drive it back to Vancouver. So that was a cheap way. It was 12 hours by car to go through Revelstoke National Park, to go in a car, free of charge, and travel all the way to Vancouver, free of charge, and see Vancouver, without paying for the trip to Vancouver. I don't think we did that in order to save money. We did it in a way that was cost effective, but it was a way we always found ways to combine travel. When I say we, I pretty much traveled alone, but we combined travel in the least expensive way and usually combined it with a job. That was the example of Atlantic City and Paris for 4 months. I remember being in Paris when Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon and first person on the moon. And I watched that. That was around 3 o'clock in the morning.
So what advice would you give young high school students now in respect to money saving?
The first thing I would tell them, and remember, a lot of this is socioeconomics. For example, if you have two parents and they're both on welfare, clearly they can't be giving you money in order to sustain yourself. So I think a poorer kid has a better opportunity to be hungrier to make money because they came up a little harder. A lot of the kids today are spoiled and would spend a lot of money or be given things that are really probably relatively useless. For example, a pair of running shoes that cost $130 when you could get running shoes for $30. For young kids going to school. I would rather, I think it may be better to teach your kid and say, hey, here, Rick, let's go buy shoes today. But you have a choice. I can give you $100 now, and you can decide to go buy yourself a pair of running shoes, and you can buy yourself for $30, and then you can keep the other $70 and put it in the bank, and this way your $70 will grow. And by the time you're a little bit older, your $70 could become $1,000. And you didn't work. The money was working for you. I don't think parents have those discussions with their kids that often. Some smart parents do, but there is a bit of a philosophy with some parents that, well, you live once, you got to enjoy life, and one of the ways of enjoying life is spending a lot of money. That is a philosophy of many people, particularly people that are of above average income. From what you've heard so far in this
talk,
that isn't my philosophy. It's not that I thought about it, it's just not my nature. I'm not saying theirs is a bad philosophy. Their philosophy may be right in their mind. For example, if you get happiness from spending a lot of money, boy, you better make sure you earn a lot of money. So that may be a way to, Whereas why should I, for example, work 50 or 60 hours a week if I don't, and you're working one of the things you get when you work, generally speaking, in a job, is paid for the work. Some people are amazing. They work for no money. They're volunteers or they get lesser income and it gives them enjoyment from the very work that they're doing. There are not many people like that. You know, even a research scientist that's inventing stuff, they get paid to do that. They may be inventing a cure, God willing, for cancer. So they should be paid billions, but they're not. They're paid a very relatively low sum of money. And because they're working for the cause and they have a great skill. They're inventors and science persons. So I think a lot of this has to do with the parents. Going back to what I said early on, there was a distinction between my late father, who was a very hard worker, but he did spend everything that he earned. Unlike my mother, who tried to save, she didn't work during the marriage. She took care of the kids, etc. But she saved money from the savings that she got from the money that my late father spent by returning a lot of the stuff to the stores that my father used to buy. My father never grew up rich, but he did spend everything that he earned. Eventually, he made some money later on, but he died very, very early at the age of 57. So just at the time when he could have, if you will, enjoyed himself a little bit more.
So today people don't save for a rainy day.
You know what? I think smart and not so smart people, I think they know and intend to save. But two reasons why they won't save. Number one, you want to, maybe they do enjoy themselves more by spending what they earn. So it's understandable. That's not always a good philosophy. If, for example, you're married and you have kids that can't support themselves, they may have a disability or they may not be able to find a job. So I believe in that parents do have obligations for the next generation to a degree. Not an obligation to spoil the kids, but to show them that there is another way, and then they can make the option. So I had the advantage of my late mom showed me one way, and my dad showed me the other way, and I sort of compromised somewhere in the middle. I never got a lot of satisfaction of, like, why would you buy a suit? In my days, a fancy suit would cost just $200. A suit. Whereas you can also get a suit for $60 and $50. Okay? And it would look like the same suit. It would be blue, or it would be black, or it would be gray. So why spend the extra on that? Now, I respect, and I know there's people that do spend the extra on that because it makes them feel better. I never had that feeling. In fact, I had a better feeling knowing I got virtually the same thing for less. And what would I do with the so-called extra money? I would put it away because I did have, and still do, to some degree, probably a little less, satisfaction in seeing the money grow without working for it. Because money grows by itself if you save it. It's the easiest way to make money in the world, by saving and watching it grow. The example I gave you 20 minutes ago is if you put away the 140,000 of the 160 for the house, you would earn interest at 21% per year at a time when the rent was only $285 a month to live in an upper duplex. But as it turns out, the house eventually became worth over $1 million many, many years later. But people forget that they may have spent more than $1 million just to keep that house going. And far more than the $285 a month rent, which would have been more later on, of course. So
final words.
Final words. First thing is, at least be an example. My parents never sat me down and said, this is the right way or this is the wrong way. I should say that I do remember walking to the bank with my mom, and she showed me how to open up a bank account. So I used to go there every week and put in, whether it was 50 cents or $1. So she showed me that. But they never sat you down and said, make sure you save every week for a rainy day. I think they showed me by how they lived. They had a sense of modesty about them in a material way. And I remember my father wanted to move to a bit of a fancier area. My mother said, no, we're going to stay where we are. And we lived throughout our whole life till I got married in a relatively, I would say, middle class or lower middle class area, even though my parents were doing all right. We never moved to a very fancy area. So that was the example that they showed. So I think at the end of the day, we're products of our environment. Kids will follow what their parents do and show, generally speaking. Of course, there are many exceptions. But if you grow up going to Florida every holiday period, chances are when you get married, you're probably going to want to follow into that same pattern. Same thing as if you grow up going to St. Agathe every holiday period, chances are you may end up going there 1 hour from Montreal. So we're all a product of our environment, and the saddest is some of the parents send their kids to these very, very fancy schools where a lot of the kids are products of an environment which is not always healthy. They may get a great education, but the best education that the kids can get is by seeing how their parents behave and act and how they live, and what portion of their income goes to charity, towards savings, and, if you will, holidays and other material stuff. Just teach your kids to be careful and sit them down, or show them a great example that they can just see it very, very clearly, and the right thing will happen. And then just hope for the best. You never know.
Thank you very much. It's been very interesting, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.